Okay, welcome back Year 10s. This is the second video on bivariate data. In this video, we're going to look at looking at a relationship, so deciding whether you have a relationship between two variables when you have plotted a scatter plot. And the second thing that we're going to look at is how to create a scatter plot on your calculator, because that is a more efficient way sometimes of generating the data in a display, particularly if you don't need to actually do one by hand. You just want to look at the data and analyze that data. Sometimes it's better just to pop it into your calculator so that you can have a look at it, and then you can do what you need to do basically with the scatter plot from there. So in our previous lesson, we looked at the EV and the RV. We know, of course, that the EV we always put on the x-axis or the horizontal axis, and the RV we always put on the vertical axis or the y-axis. So that's a little bit of a refresher. And what we also did was we plot these scatter plots by hand. So I'm not going to go through that again. Now what I want you to consider is, once you have your scatter plot, we're going to be having a look at the dots, or these little crosses perhaps, if you've used little crosses. Now it is possible to make a judgment just by looking at your scatter plot, the general appearance, as to whether you have a correlation or a relationship, or whether you don't, because sometimes you don't actually have a correlation between two variables. So if we have a look at this first one as an example, this scatter plot right here, you notice that we have a random scatter of dots. And when you see that, so we can't, there doesn't seem to be any pattern. So I'll write on here, no clear pattern in the dots. What we're seeing there is no relationship, or no association is another word that we can use. And remember, there is a third word that you might come across, and that is correlation. So we don't have anything, we don't seem to have a pattern with these two variables, whatever the EV and the RV happen to be. With the second two scatter plots that we've got here, we do actually have a bit of a pattern here. So if you have a look at this one on the left, we've got as the X value, as the EV value, is getting bigger, we can see that the RV value is rising as well. So for example, this EV value is the lowest, and it's also the lowest RV value. Whereas if we go to the highest EV, it's also, well, close to the highest RV value as well. So when we see this happening, and you see the one on the right is the same, the dots are sort of drifting upwards, this is called a positive association. Now, the difference between them is, you'll notice that with these ones, these dots are fairly well spread. So they're not sort of clustered together very much. They're pretty spread out. So when you've got them spread out like this, we would call that weak positive. And when they are clustered together, so you'll see this one starting to resemble more of a straight line, we would call that a strong positive. So when these dots are drifting upwards, another way to look at it is that as EV increases, RV, so the other variable, is also increases. So they're sort of drifting together in the same direction. The opposite of that, of course, will be a negative association, and that's what these two down here are showing. So if I put negative, and of course we've got one that's weak, and we've got one that is strong. Before we move on, I'll just talk about what's happening here. We've got an EV value that's getting, as you look left to right, the EV values are getting bigger. But what's happening is that the RV is actually decreasing. So they're not really moving in the same direction. So for example, the lowest EV value, which is this one, because it's closest to this side of the axis, the lowest EV value actually happens to be the highest RV value. And the opposite's true. The highest EV value happens to be the lowest RV value. So this is where you've got them moving in different directions. So in other words, as the EV increases, the RV decreases. It's going in a different direction. The only difference between that one and this one here is, again, the clustering. So you'll see this one resembles much more of a straight line. So we say that is a stronger relationship. Now, one other thing that we do add, since we're talking about this showing more of a straight line, we can actually add this word linear. And that's something that we do a lot of in year 11 and even in year 12 as well, is we make sure we refer to the dots are going up in a fairly straight or linear fashion rather than in a curved fashion. So you can add that word linear. It's good practice to get used to putting that in as well. The last thing that I'll mention is that outliers. Outliers are values that are unusual. Or another word that you might use is atypical, so not typical. They can be identified from a scatter plot because they'll be dots that are sort of isolated. So they're really far away from the rest of the data. They're bucking the trend. So if you have a look, say, at this one, if I had a dot up here, it's very different. It's very far removed from the rest of the data. So that would be referred to as an outlier. So if you want to add one of them to your diagram, you might like to. So that's how we describe the association. So what you'll do is you'll create your scatter plot, whether it be by hand or on the calculator, which I'm about to show you, and then you'll describe it as either weak or strong. We can actually say moderate as well. So sometimes if you're not sure, you can use that word moderate. That would be in between the two of them. So weak or strong, positive or negative, and then of course, if you're seeing that they're drifting in a fairly straight line, you'll use that word linear as well. So to finish off in this lesson, what I'll do is show you how to draw a scatter plot using your calculator. Now there are some screenshots in your notes, and that's got, you'll see time and mark, but what I'm going to do is just use some of the data that you had in a previous lesson to create a scatter plot. So in a previous lesson, I think there was some data on, if you could just go back a couple of pages, daily temperature and number of pies sold. I'm going to use that to create the scatter plot. So if I go to my calculator, you'll notice I clicked on this one, lists and spreadsheets. So I'd like you to do that, and I want you to in lists and spreadsheets, you're going to use two columns here. So column A and column B. And what you're going to do is you're going to enter your data into those columns. What's most important though is that in column A, you type in the name of your data. So the first variable I'm going to use is temperature. So I'm just going to put it in temp for temperature, only because it takes a little while to type on this calculator screen. The second one is number of pies sold. So I'll just call that pies. Okay, so the temperatures I would then enter in to the calculator. So these would come from a table, and this one is in your notes, like so. And then I would write in the data for pies. Now just make sure that you match them. So in the table, I'll show you what I'm referring to. It's just this one here. So I just need to make sure that the data lines up. So next to 12, I need to have 620. Next to 22, I need to have 315. So you need to make sure they go in the same order. like so. Okay, so once everything's in, now what we're going to do is we're going to add data and statistics. So what to do here, and we'll write this down as well in our notes, you're going to press Control and then I, and then have a look here, number 5. If you just press number 5 on your little keypad there, it'll take you straight there rather than having to scroll up and down. What you'll notice when you do that is you'll have just this random scatter of dots that appear on the screen, and you'll notice on the sides here we've got click to add variable. So this here is your axis, that's your y-axis, and down here is your x-axis. So since temperature was the EV, I'm going to put temperature here. So I'm going to click and enter temp. And what you'll notice is it puts the temperatures in order on a number line. I also need to add though the other variable, which was pies, so number of pies sold. So now I'll click on the y-axis and I'll click on pies. Now what you'll notice here is that it has automatically lifted all of those dots so that they are listed as an ordered pair, so as coordinates. So for example, this first one here is a temperature of 8, and number of pies was 660. You can hover over any of these points and it will show you what they are. Like so. From here, if I need to then describe this association, I can see that it's a fairly strong and it's a negative, so it's drifting downwards. It's a strong negative association. And the other thing that I can say is that as the temperature increases, the number of pies that are being sold is decreasing since it has that negative association. So I'm going to just go back to the notes now, just so that you can jot down a couple of points as to what we did here. So we first enter the data in lists and spreadsheets. Under appropriate labels. So you want to give it a label, otherwise when you select your variable, you won't have a label there to select it. Okay, second thing we did was we pressed Control and then I, and we added data and statistics, which is number 5. So click on your EV axis, select your EV, and then click on RV axis and select your RV. And there we go, your scatter plot will be shown. Ready for you to analyze. So I'll stop there so that you'll be able to have some practice with this, and remember too that you can obviously add any annotations to your notes as you go, anything extra that you think you need, and remember too to ask your teacher if you need any extra help.